3 times under President Trump, House Republicans raised the debt ceiling without any controversy or fanfare.
We need to have an agreement that's worthy of the American public.
We need to win again as Republicans. We got to dispense with this culture of losing.
Hello, I'm Ed O'Keefe in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. There are 530 days until America decides who should be president and control Congress. And today, the president and Congress are still deciding how to raise the nation's borrowing limit. But nobody seems to think the U.S. will default on its debts, even though the alleged X-date is just a week away. For the latest, we turn to Weijia Zhang, CBS News senior White House correspondent, and Scott McFarland, CBS News congressional correspondent. They are at their respective posts on either end of Pennsylvania Avenue. Weijia, I want to begin with you, with what President Biden had to say earlier about the ongoing talks. Let's take a listen.
It is time for Congress to act now. Now, I want to be clear that the negotiations we're having with Speaker McCarthy is about the outlines of what the budget will look like, not about default. It's about competing visions for America.
You have some new reporting on the deal that the White House is hoping for. What do you know?
So it's really telling there that the president is trying to make the distinction that all of these talks and negotiations are strictly about the budget and not about defaulting, which he says is not up for question. But of course, if you ask Kevin McCarthy, he would say that he wouldn't even begin to have those conversations about raising the debt ceiling if the president weren't ready to talk about deep spending cuts. And we know now that the current proposal on the table from the White House includes extending the debt ceiling until 2025. They don't have a specific date in year. I am told that the whole point is that it will go through 2024. So if there were to be some sort of a showdown over the debt ceiling again, it would at least be after the 2024 presidential election. This is not something that the White House wants the president to go through again publicly in this way. Secondly, it would resend unspent COVID relief funds. Those are funds that have already been approved but not allocated, up to $30 billion, although they haven't agreed on an exact figure for that either. And it would freeze spending for 2 years. And the White House says because of that, that really equals cuts of $1 trillion because they're factoring in inflation, they're factoring in all the things they would be spending more money on and saying that, you know, that 2-year period of not spending will actually equal $1 trillion. Of course, I'm sure Scott will tell you the Republicans have a very different interpretation of what spending cuts means.
I was going to say, when they can't even agree on the math, that's never a good sign. But Scott, Speaker McCarthy also sounded optimistic earlier today. Let's listen to what he said.
We worked well past midnight last night, and yesterday I thought was a very good day. I thought we made some progress. There's still some outstanding issues, and I've directed our teams to work 24/7 to try to solve this problem.
Keep working 24/7. Is he going to be able to get this done? And do we have any sense now, Scott, of when or by when they have to get it done?
Well, we know they've left town. They bailed out of here midday today with a long holiday weekend in front of them, and the House leaders reinforced this statement they've been making through the course of the negotiations, that they're going to put whatever agreement comes through into legislative language and give members 3 full days to look at it, which kind of shrinks that time frame even further and really does push things into the middle of next week, in which other variables will surface. Will the U.S. Senate try to slow or stop whatever agreement comes through? One Republican senator from Utah today says he has grave concerns and might employ parliamentary tools to slow things further. That June 1st clock is ticking louder and louder, and as we race toward the clock, every indication tonight is that the negotiators are still talking, which means they're still racing in quicksand.
That's one way of putting it. And the idea that he's going to give this 3 days to marinate in this environment where there have been so many concerns expressed by the far left and the far right will be something to see if it indeed comes to pass. You know as well, Scott, that progressive Democrats up on the Hill have been concerned about this, that the president may be negotiating away key party priorities. But you spoke with a more moderate Democrat today who shared a different view.
Yeah, Ed, there's been this phrase hostage-taking used by Democrats to describe what the Republican leadership's doing in the House, that they've taken the debt ceiling as a negotiation tool, despite it being so dangerous, despite it being potential economic nitroglycerin. Washington State Democrat Adam Smith, top member of the House Armed Services Committee for Democrats, defended the president's decision to engage in these negotiations. Should there be negotiations? I mean, should the White House be engaging in this?
Well, they are engaging in this.
Should they be?
Well, yes. I mean, if somebody takes a hostage, I was like, I'm not going to negotiate with a hostage taker. Do you care about the hostage? Yes. Well, then you're where you're at. The president cares about making sure that we don't default on our debt. The Republicans have taken a hostage. He's got to talk to them.
Democrats are still pushing for that discharge petition, Ed, trying to get Republicans to sign off on a debt ceiling increase without their leadership's blessing.
Yeah, well, we'll see where this goes. Weijia, real quick on another topic. The president today making history in his pick for the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Tell us a little bit more about Air Force General C.Q. Brown.
That's right, Ed. This is a man who seems to be the man for this moment, as the White House describes him as someone who is deeply versed in all things in the Indo-Pacific region as tensions arise with China. He is also familiar with all the, situations that are unfolding with the war in Russia. But you're right, he is making history. He has already done that because he was the first black man to lead any branch of the military. And now, because the defense secretary is also a black man, that is, of course, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, it is the first time in U.S. history that the top positions at the Pentagon, the military and civilian positions, are held by black men. And I think it's really fitting, Ed, because General Brown made news in 2020 because he filmed in uniform a deeply personal and emotional message about the killing of George Floyd. And he made headlines about that because he did that in a way that we hadn't really seen before when you're talking about, a general in uniform. And today marks, of course, 3 years since George Floyd was murdered. And so I think it's a very moving piece also for the White House, this White House in particular, that puts such a priority on trying to unite the country.
Yeah, and we'll see how long it takes for his nomination to get through. Weijia Jiang at the White House, Scott McFarlane on Capitol Hill. Thank you both. Turning now to the 2024 presidential campaign. Was it a disaster? Signs of a defunct campaign? Or is it a sign of big interest and desire to help fund and launch what many see as the most viable alternative to Donald Trump? Pardon the puns. But in an interview earlier today, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis shared his take on the technical difficulties surrounding his closely watched campaign launch on Twitter Spaces.
So I was sitting there ready to go, and then they got overwhelmed with so many people trying to join. I think the most they had was like 100,000 in the past. They had 700,000 in the room, but there were many, many more that were trying to go in. And so I was just kind of waiting for it to happen, that it did, and then we went on and got it done. But I think the fact that Elon and Twitter were involved, for conservatives, that's meaningful.
One quick thing, though, the governor's inaccurate when he says the largest Twitter Spaces event had about 100,000 people. For example, the platform had upwards of 3.3 million people listen into a live interview that Elon Musk recently conducted with the BBC. But let's head now to South Florida, where we find Robert Costa, CBS News chief elections and campaign correspondent. Bob, good to see you. A big meeting of the governor's top donors continues there in Miami. Give us a sense of whether they're reaching the goals they've set for themselves, and what else has transpired today on day one.
Ed, it's good to be with you from here in Miami. Governor DeSantis' campaign is looking ahead. They've already amassed a lot of money, especially for the super PAC, Never Back Down, but beginning to start to bundle for the official presidential campaign launch this week, as DeSantis now heads next week to Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and really starts to make his appeal in those early voting states. Donors and DeSantis associates tell CBS News today that there was a bit of consternation about the spectacle of what unfolded on Twitter, but ultimately they do not believe it will leave a permanent mark on the DeSantis campaign, nor sway donors from coming into the fold.
Yeah, and it's important to remember, as many in politics and the media have said in the past, Twitter is not real life, and not everybody spends time on that platform. But you're there in South Florida. There's been another development today in the case involving former President Donald Trump. New details of possible obstruction in the classified documents investigation. What have we learned, and what is the Trump team saying in response?
Ed, the scrutiny on former President Donald Trump's handling of classified records has been a story for a long time. There have been incremental turns, and there was another one today, first reported by the Washington Post, that the federal government, as part of the special counsel investigation on the federal level, now have a spotlight in that investigation on alleged movements of documents behind the scenes before the FBI decided to come to Mar-a-Lago last year and take those documents from the property. This all comes as Trump continues to face legal challenges in Georgia, a possible indictment there coming in August, and then, of course, the January 6th case also being investigated by the special counsel. All of these things loom over the Trump presidential campaign, but Trump campaign advisors tell us they feel good about the polling and about Trump's standing in the party, especially after what happened with the DeSantis rollout.
Yeah, I mean, he maintains a double-digit lead no matter what poll you're looking at these days. Robert Costa there in the 305 on the campaign trail. We thank you. We'll talk to you soon. Coming up, the former Trump administration official who's made it his mission to help get Ron DeSantis elected to the White House joins us to discuss the Florida governor's path to victory. You're streaming America Decides.
From a family of steelworkers,
Steel builds our nation.
Ron DeSantis served our nation.
When the world went mad, we stood as the citadel of freedom. Freedom is here to stay.
And stood for what was right.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was part of a new hype video released by the DeSantis Super PAC, Never Back Down, today on the first full day of the DeSantis 2024 presidential campaign. Joining me now is the founder of that PAC, former Trump Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, Ken Cuccinelli. Ken, thank you so much for taking the time today to join us on what is a big first day for your preferred horse in this race. First things first, we've been anticipating that Never Back Down PAC is going to get about an $80 million infusion of cash from the governor's Florida statewide PAC. Has that happened, or when is it happening?
I don't know that we have received anything like that yet. I certainly hope we will be receiving that. That's up to the folks leading that PAC now. But as far as I know, nothing like that has come over yet. We are the largest PAC so far. We raised $30 million in our first month. And we have deployed $15 million of positive advertising, and we knocked on our 30,000th door in Iowa yesterday morning. And so, you know, to really capture the grassroots movement that's excited that the governor is actually in this race. So we're off to a good start.
We should remind viewers who may not recall or know that when you're running a super PAC like this that is endorsing a certain candidate, because you're living in the super PAC organization, you are no longer legally allowed to coordinate with his campaign, which is only now just getting off the ground. But we know that there were conversations before this began about how the super PAC might operate and how you might spend money and where and whatnot. So looking at the strategy going forward, you mentioned 30,000 doors in Iowa. I mean, initially here, the goal really has to be winning Iowa itself, right?
Well, sure, but we're building to win everything. We're building through Super Tuesday. No campaign or super PAC has ever done that before, and we will be prepared to go the distance just like Ron DeSantis always goes the distance. And that'll be true literally door by door, voter by voter, and none of the other campaigns will be able to compete with that, and none of the other campaigns have as much policy ammo and good news to report about their candidates as we do with Governor DeSantis. So we have plenty of territory to cover. That's about a third of the states, just to give your viewers a rough sense of how much of America we're looking to be prepared for. It's not just Iowa, though that is first, and we pay close attention to that.
When you say door to door, that is another thing that's a little different about what you're doing, is that instead of spending all the money on advertising, which inevitably runs counter to what the candidate would like, you're planning a pretty aggressive, and some would say unprecedented, ground operation in these states to get in front of people and say, take a look at him, or, you know, go see him if you can when he's here in person.
Absolutely, this is unprecedented, and we're professionalizing our door knockers. We've been recruiting people who are already enthusiastic about the governor and saying, hey, do you want to be on this team the whole time? They're getting a week's worth of training at our Fort Benning effort, as we call it, and not everybody's making it through that. But those that do, as I said, have already been deployed in Iowa, and they'll be rolling out to New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada and the Super Tuesday states shortly thereafter here in the next few weeks as more and more people get trained up. So it's quite an army that we're building, and it's a very ambitious effort. But we are really building on the wave of support that the governor has created with his amazing successes in Florida, frankly, standing against the tide, including President Trump, on things like COVID and Disney. And the media, he has four of the biggest media markets in the country that have really kind of been in his grill for 5 years, and he's handled it very, very well. And those are tests that Republican voters like to see already passed, not tried out for the first time in a presidential election.
Let me ask you, I want to play for our audience a part of the announcement video that you released today. Let's take a look.
Okay.
We will never, ever surrender to the woke mob. We will be courageous, and we will never back down.
I'm going to put up we have what we call a screen grab of one part of that video where you see fighter jets seemingly flying over the governor as he's thrusting his hands into the air, and what looks like a bit of good timing. But our understanding is that's artificial intelligence, that wasn't an actual moment that happened, but one that was created in a lab, so to speak. Is that the case? And is this the future of political advertising, the idea that you can mix real with artificially created images?
So artificial intelligence suggests that something else put this all together other than a human, and that's not the case. I don't know if the specific camera shot in that one screen grab is from B-roll of an event, or if it is stitched together pieces, putting a military scene over top of him as he speaks. Obviously, the governor was in the military. He was not a pilot. He was a JAG lawyer in Iraq and in Guantanamo. And but I don't know the specifics of how these are put together. We put together ideas for the videos that we want to convey about the governor, and then creative folks bring a product that accomplishes that goal to deliver that message. And obviously there's fine-tuning and evaluation and competition for who does those. But I will never be able to sit in front of you and answer for literally every single screenshot, what angle, et cetera, and who's in it. But the words you heard about courageous and fighting the woke mob are themes that he has exhibited in his tenure as governor, and those are elements of his success that are controversial yet critical to America going forward. We believe, and so do millions of American voters, and some companies like Anheuser-Busch and Target and Disney are finding out that a lot of American families feel the same way as the governor, and he's the only one out there fighting this hard on those things for them.
So it may be his words, but you reserve the right to take creative liberties, at least with the images every so often, is what you're signaling.
Well, we certainly are going to deliver messages, and sometimes that won't even involve the governor. So, we're certainly going to keep his themes and amplify them as best we can.
Excellent. Ken Cuccinelli, founder of the Never Back Down PAC. You've been generous with your time before he was a candidate. We hope you will continue to be now that he is a candidate. We'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely.
As more and more candidates enter the 2024 Republican primary, just how big can the field get before it hurts the party? If it hurts the party at all? We'll ask the RNC next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. The Republican presidential field for 2024 officially expanded this week with two different kinds of formal announcements. Monday, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott made a more traditional kickoff in his hometown of North Charleston, South Carolina. And of course, on Wednesday, as mentioned, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis made his announcement on Twitter Spaces after some technical issues delayed the proceedings. For more on a big week in the GOP, RNC Communications Director Danielle Alvarez joins us here in studio. Good to see you in person.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So like we said, Tim Scott earlier this week, Ron DeSantis now in, handful of others still thinking about it. Another big field. Is there any concern among party leaders about the fact that so many are in, so many more might get in, and there continues to be no clear sign besides former President Donald Trump of who really is dominating this race?
You know, the field is expansive. I would say that I'd certainly anticipated this. I know conversations at the RNC, we anticipated a larger field. I probably would have lost the bet that some folks decided not to run who we maybe thought would have thrown their name in the ring. But I think it's wonderful because you can really debate and have a contest of ideas and let Republican voters and delegates decide who our eventual nominee will be. And so I think it's going to be a brutal process. I think it'll be, a very intense contest. But I think it's what the American people need so that they can choose the best opponent to face Joe Biden.
After what happened last night on Twitter Spaces, should Republican candidates continue to trust Twitter as a platform where they think they can reach voters or communicate their views?
You know, I listened to that live and I read a lot of the comments on Twitter afterwards. And the reality is that our conservative base appreciates that Twitter is providing this free speech platform. So of course there were technical issues, but the reality is that Governor DeSantis, and I'm a Florida girl from the Sunshine State, Governor DeSantis was able to tout his record, was able to get his message across of what he would tackle if he had the opportunity to face Joe Biden. And really the contrast there was with Joe Biden's announcement. He had a 3-minute video where he couldn't tout a single success and he couldn't talk about what he had, his plans moving forward.
Yeah. First debate between however many candidates we have at that point is in August. Remind us real quick, what are the general criteria in order to make that stage?
So our debate committee at the RNC has so far only announced that the debate will be in Milwaukee in August. We've not announced the date and we haven't announced the criteria yet. I know that that's something that the chairwoman, Ronna McDaniel, has said should be coming soon. I know that there will be a pledge to support the eventual nominee because we've got to be united to defeat Joe Biden once Republican voters and delegates decide on who our candidate is. We'll have some type of polling threshold and we'll have some type of small dollar donor threshold. If you make that threshold, then it will be, obviously your opportunity to make your case on the debate stage.
The pledge to support whoever is the nominee might fly in the face of the views of the frontrunner, Donald Trump, who has not answered that question with an affirmative yes. Do you have assurances that he'll be there, given that he's the frontrunner?
Our chairwoman has talked to each and every candidate and potential candidate that has indicated that they want to run or has thrown their name in the ring, and we're in communication with them. She's certainly spoken to the former president. His decision to join the debate stage will be a strategic one for his team to make and his campaign to make. I certainly hope he joins. I think that debate is really important. We're seeing the contrast with the DNC, who's not having debates, who's not going to test Joe Biden and put him on a debate stage, even though they have other candidates that are polling in double digits. So I think that debates are important. The RNC takes debates very seriously. I certainly hope that all of our candidates who meet the criteria join that debate stage to make their case.
One final very important question about debates. When will CBS News be hosting one?
I sure hope. I think it's really important that we reach all very wide variety of audiences. I think it's been mentioned before. We had 18 plus entities submit proposals to host a debate. So far, we've only announced the first debate in Milwaukee in August with Fox. Our second debate location in California at the Reagan Library has been announced, but we haven't announced a partner. We're going to take it one step at a time, but I hope we pick very diverse platforms so that we can take our message not just to our base, but to independent voters that we've got to turn our way in order to beat Joe Biden in November 24.
So you're saying there's a chance?
I certainly hope.
All right. Danielle Alvarez with the Republican National Committee. Good to see you in person. Thank you for being here. That does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. For now, you're streaming CBS News.